Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and tonight we're going to take a look at laundry, or in particular 19th century wash day. Now famously, wash day was generally on a Monday and it would take the entire day. It was such a time consuming thing, and obviously by the time we get the invention of things like the twin tub, the washing machines that we know and love today, it's quite interesting. Prior to that, it was really hard work. And even though it's a Sunday today, we're actually literally on the eve of wash day, and that actually meant stuff as well. So on the Sunday, obviously it was a day of rest. It was a day where you can't really do anything. It was a case of going to church and relaxing. It was the day set aside for God's work as such. Then by the evening, some families would have put washing to one side to be used for the next day, and they would sort through it. So it was quite important to keep those that are white in one pile and those that are coloured in a different pile. And it was also important to go through that washing also, and it was a case of looking for things that needed extra work done to it, and also looking at where buttons were hanging off, or maybe even where patches or repairs had to be done. And really that could be done on a Monday morning, but we know for a fact, I know for a fact, some people did do that late on a Sunday evening. So even though it is Sunday evening now, really, if you wanted to, you can do your background preparation ready for laundry day or wash day tomorrow. But when it came to wash day specifically, so Monday morning, the normal thing would be to first of all draw water from the nearest water pump, unless you were lucky enough to live in a household that had plumbed in water. Very rare in the 19th century for most people anyway. So you would send someone out, maybe children, with some buckets. They would go to the nearest water pump and they will bring back water. What you have to remember about water pumps is water pumps were not always on. They were turned off at certain times. They were padlocked shut to stop them being used. And the other thing, some people had their own water pump within their court. If you think of Worcester, for example, we lived in courts, in entries. There were often communal water points in those sort of areas as well. So you would gather your water, and whilst that was being done, the adults in the family, maybe even the dad of or the man of the household, could start laying the fire in the copper. That's if you had one. Not everyone had a copper. Some were shared. Other times it was just a case of making a fire in the room and finding an appropriate container. But a copper, if you had one, maybe even in a shared laundry, looked like that. And what it actually consisted of is an absolutely large copper basin, basically, and that's just in the center there. And in this brick surround around it, there was a grate at the bottom, and what you would actually do is you would get an axe and you would chop up wood quite small, or maybe you've collected in some old vegetable crates or something like that. They would be cut up quite small, and you would stack them inside rolled up newspaper, twist that into the wood as well, and you would light it. Maybe if you've got matches, you would use those, or maybe even a flint and steel, which was used for a very long time. And once you've got the water in the copper and the fire's going underneath, you can put the wooden lid on, and this will keep the heat in. And the idea of this is to boil the water. You've got to get it up to boiling point, and that was quite important when it came to wash day. Boiling clothes, modern clothes by the way, probably won't last very long if you boil them. Now, some of the clothes may have been sorted into a pile that was specifically marked in some way. Maybe there was ink on it, for example. And what you could have done on the Sunday night, or maybe even early on Monday morning, is to soak them. And famously, if you look for books like Mrs. Beeton, they give you tips. For example, milk could be placed on ink stains, for example, and it would soak overnight or a few hours before washing, and it would actually help get the ink out. So there's a lot of little tips like that you can read about in books like Mrs. Beeton. But remember, Mrs. Beeton is not the only book. There's a lot of household help books out there for people. Then the clothes would be thrown in, and it was a case of boiling them, and that was quite important, and that kept a lot of the diseases away and a lot of the fleas and lice away if you're living in a poor household. The clothes could also be agitated. There was lots of different ways of doing that. One was to take hold of the laundry tongs, and it was a case of manipulating the clothes inside the copper, or you could actually take them out of the copper and you could throw them into a dolly tub, which was very much like a corrugated oil drum as such, really, more water in there, and you would have a dolly, and that would go into it, and you would literally act like the washing machine. But another method was actually using the washboard like this one, and this was often made out of tin. Some of these were even made out of glass, and these came in a variety of sizes, and it was a case of literally smashing the dirt out. And if you think back to for example, rugs, that was smashed, the dirt was smashed out of those as well. You'd hang it on a line and beat it with a carpet beater. So it was very aggressive forms of cleaning, and this took all day. The actual washing process took all day. There were some detergents being used, however in the early part of history people were actually making their own. And obviously when we did a video on soap, for example, you will notice I spoke about laundry soap being around before toilet soap, for example. So we were using soaps on laundry before we were actually using them on our bodies. Some people even made their own using things like soapwort, for example, a very old plant that was used for centuries really. But as the period went by, as the 19th century, as the Victorian period went into the 20th century, they were starting to bring out lots and lots of official domestic soap like this one here. And this was usually grated to actually make what we would now call the soap powder as such, really. And then once you'd done all that, you could even add things like Ricketts Blue or Blue Bag, and I'm sure there's people out there now reminiscing about these things. There's a lot of adverts for these years ago, and because it was blue, it actually made the white whiter than white, and in a way it's what we still use in washing powders today, which is why you often find little blue specks and things like that. And it was a case of boiling and washing the clothes and making them very, very clean. You have to remember, by the Victorian, especially by the end of the Victorian era, they always used to say cleanliness was next to godliness, so it was really, really important. But then once you'd washed your clothes, it was very, very important to rinse them afterwards to get the soap out, because that would enable it to dry a lot easier. It wouldn't irritate the skin afterwards, and it was usually rinsed and then wrung out. Now there's different methods of wringing out clothes. For example, you could have two people stood opposite each other and they all twist the opposite way, and that's a good method of wringing out large things like sheets, for example. The other method would be to squeeze it individually, so you'd hold it in your hand and literally squeeze them or twist them. Once again, I would not recommend that with modern clothing. But then there was also, and this wasn't usually an individual's item, this could be shared as well, the mangle, which was a big chunky piece of ironwork, and you would feed the clothes in. You could actually change the setting to be tighter or wider apart, and then you squeeze the water out. So in a way, you're actually starting the drying process. Now, once you've done that, you would then hang your washing out, or you may have an airer, or in some cases, a lot of kitchens often had them that came from the ceiling on a pulley system, and you'd lower it down and you'd hang your washing out. However, most people did hang their washing outside, which always amazes me when you think of the Victorian era or the 19th and 20th century, with the air full of coal soot, for example, coal fires, factories, railway steam trains going past. It's a wonder the clothes actually got, to a certain degree, whiter than white as such. So you throw your clothes over the line, and as the period went by, more and more official clothes pegs or dolly pegs were actually created. Prior to that, people used to have sticks that they used to crack down the middle and then carve them in a way, and then either string them or put little bits of metal around to actually hold them together. It was quite common for gypsy travellers, for example, to go around years ago selling things like dolly pegs. I do actually have quite a few different types of pegs, because it's quite interesting to see, and that could be a video in its own right, how pegs have changed over the years up to the more modern clip ones that we use today, really. But once the clothes have dried, you would then bring it in, and then it was normally a case of doing your ironing. And ironing before the invention of electricity was done in one of two ways. One is using a flat iron like this one here, which a lot of people still use today as door stops and things like that. And these would be heated up in front of the fire, and you can sprinkle your cloth with starch, for example, and then you bear down with the flat iron to actually iron the clothes. And these came in a variety of shapes and sizes. Some had rounded bottoms, some were quite pointy, and they were usually designed for a specific purpose, maybe collars or the backs of a shirt or other areas of clothing. And then once all that was done, it was then a case of folding it up and putting it to one side, or maybe actually putting it on. In some cases, families didn't have that many clothes and they were usually wearing a set and washing a set. There wasn't usually a vast luxury of opening a wardrobe or cupboard. Now, an alternative to a flat iron, there were some that you opened up and you could actually scatter hot coals in there and close it down, and that obviously lasted much longer. But obviously eventually you get the twin tubs come along, you get things like the washing machines, you even get some of the early irons which actually used to plug into the light, but that's another story altogether. But what always amazes me, and Helen's always saying this, despite labour saving devices coming in, like the washing machine and so on, it is quite interesting that we filled that time. And even now in 2021, people say, oh, I haven't got time to do that, I haven't got time to do that. And I know a lot of people wash clothes, dry them, and then hang them back up and then literally give them a quick shake and put them on. And it's weird because in theory, with the washing machines and the better quality irons and so on, we should have more to do, less to do now. We should have gaps in our diary, especially on a Monday, which was usually wash day. Now, talking about laundry, talking about wash days, it's quite interesting that when you get to the late Georgian, or more so into the Victorian and Edwardian period, that is your standard wash day on a Monday. And it's interesting that that continued after, and even with the invention of things like washing machines, I know a lot of people still use a Monday as a wash day, and it's quite interesting. Now, if you remember having a wash day, if you remember using starch, if you remember using a flat iron, or even having a copper and having to light it up in the morning on a Monday morning, do let us know. Comment on here, but more so, make sure you comment on our Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. We'd love to hear your stories, because we always say we like to learn from people all the time, and some people may have tips out there about a wash day that we didn't know about. So do let us know, and we like to call that oral history. It's the best way of learning from people that was there. Anyway, on that note, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.